Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello, girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academy's podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, one of the WFA's educators and a women's online coach. If you haven't done already, please make sure that you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on another podcast. I am super excited about today's chat because I have Ailey Jolie. For those who don't know Ailey, she's a certified counselor and a healing expert with multiple degrees and specialties, including trauma recovery, somatic studies, and so much more, that she helps people with combining psychology, somatics, a little bit of feminism, a little bit of neuroscience, and holistic healing. Now, Ailey's background is a little bit of in the showbiz area, and she went through her own journey where she felt her body didn't feel like it was hers. She reconnected with it, but it was tough. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to this because she's been there, and not only as a Harvard expert, but also through her own journey from all corners of the world. She is teaching people how to navigate this from her own learned pains, but also being able to find peace through it too. Ailey, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to spend some time chatting with you.
Same. And I would love to start the conversation around relationships and dating. And prior to recording, we were talking about how people mistake chemistry versus compatibility when it comes into dating. Can you please explain in the difference between the two, and what should people be mindful of when they're assessing their connection with potential partners?
There's oftentimes so much emphasis around like having that spark or that butterfly feeling or sense of lust. And oftentimes that isn't necessarily the healthiest signal of a relationship or connection. We know that anxiety and excitement actually run on the same neural circuits of the brain. And so yes, you could be really excited about them, or you could also be nervous. We also know, and time again, if we go back to Freud, we all have a repetition compulsion within us, and we all seek out dynamics that are similar to our past. So if we grew up in a chaotic environment, our nervous system will feel that chaos is more safe and more interesting. It's what we know. And so when we go out into our dating lives, we find someone who maybe is a little chaotic or has a central nervous system that's similar to our family system. And even though we know that's not what we want to experience again, we're going to experience both excitement and anxiety around what's familiar and what we've known. And so I often kind of invite my clients to be really slow and question and get curious when they do have that really intense feeling of chemistry or attraction or desire, to break it down and to ask myself, like, is this person actually have the things that I know I need and I want to experience in a relationship? Or potentially, am I being kind of hijacked by my neurochemistry to something that's quite familiar for me? And that doesn't have to be something that's happened in the family system. It could also just be, oh my goodness, this person feels familiar to the past 10 people I've dated. And that can activate that same place. I oftentimes speak about how chemistry can be a peak experience as well. Like when you feel that level of attraction towards someone, anyone can have a peak experience. Any of us can go out and skydive or bungee jump or do something really intense athletically, and push our body in whatever way that looks like. Peak experiences are easy to have, and peak experiences neurologically and physiologically are very similar to that feeling of chemistry. And so, is that what you're looking for? A peak experience can't be sustained, but a peak experience can be co-created with someone you have compatibility with. And when I say compatibility, I mean the shared sense of values, alignment, personality congruence, that deeper type of connection where this person actually, I feel safe with them.
I love everything about that because from my experience, I can, like, thinking back now, I can see how oftentimes I would mistaken my anxiety for the excitement side of things. And then the compatibility side of things with a partner just didn't collide that well, where, again, it doesn't evolve to the areas that we're wanting to. And I would love to know, what does like slow dating mean? Because you mentioned, taking it slow, or even taking it slow within yourself to build that awareness. However, I find that too often people are either too anxious or too excited about the fact that they've started dating again. But we also know that by us taking it a little bit too fast, how can they find an alternative to that fast pace in this, superficial world of dating, to find more of that safe space to go slow dating? Like, what does that look like so they'll be able to contribute a little bit more of a healthier or more meaningful relationship?
I oftentimes remind my clients that if you're monogamous or practicing monogamy, you only need one. Like, you're only looking for one person out there. It's just one. And so yeah, there's hundreds or thousands of options available on online dating apps, and it's easy to get swept up in it and for it to feel frantic and fun and energizing and all of those things. But if you remind yourself, I'm actually only looking for one person, and I'm looking for a match, and I'm looking for someone to build something with, there is this awareness that those are actually two very separate experiences. The frenzy of swiping and meeting new people and going out and doing all that is great, and it's fun. It's all the things. And yes, through that you can meet that one person, but you'll have much more success if you stay in that mindset of, I am only looking for one. I only need one match. And so instead of going on, 2 dates in one night or 4 dates in a weekend, I'm going to go on one day with one person and see how I actually feel about them and how I actually feel after I'm done seeing them. Do they actually text me back? Do I actually want to respond? But when you're in that fast and kind of frantic dating environment, there is no time to ask those types of questions. So I know slow dating can be kind of is sometimes phrased as like a movement and against online dating, but it's a very different practice of just actually being quite conscious in your relationships with other people, but also yourself as well.
I absolutely agree with that, because I notice a lot of people dive straight into the dating scene after relationships, and they're just in this fast pace of wanting to find the next best thing because they either can't sit with their own feelings or heal from the breakup or whatever they're trying to avoid. But you mentioned such a good point around being conscious about dating. And it literally like rang bells in my ears, because I used to be that person who would date multiple people in 1 week just to get out there and get to know new people and so forth. But it actually infuriated me because it led me to feeling more anxious instead of actually being conscious and taking it slow by asking myself, what do I truly want? Who do I truly want to meet?
Yeah, and I've definitely been there before, dated multiple people, gone on all the dates, did all the things. And when I look back, at least my experience of that was like really just trying to distract myself. There wasn't actually dating that was happening. It was a lot of distraction and a lot of a fun and frantic energy. And I didn't meet anyone that I felt a deep connection with, because I actually had my life and my schedule so full and my app so full that there was no actual space for something real to build. And I think that does lead and perpetuate into kind of the cycle of being burnt out from online dating. And then people go back to it. And it's like, well, maybe there's another way to do this that actually maybe it doesn't feel as fun. It's not as energizing. It's maybe not as exciting, but maybe it will lead you to what you actually, or what you're saying you want. I don't know if that's actually what you want, but it's what you're saying you want.
And by us not knowing what we want, from my perception anyway, and correct me if I'm wrong, is us being confused with our own needs by trying to find, an individual or partner to be with, I feel as if that's people who are struggling a lot with their own self-love or their own identity by neglecting their own needs for so many months, years, and so forth. So what are some practical steps that they can start to take and begin this journey of loving themselves and prioritizing their well-being before jumping into the next relationship?
I wish I had a simple answer for you, but I don't, because it's so personal to what your relational history has looked like and the stories you have about yourself and connection. If you have a story that you're not worthy, then you'll probably potentially go out and date a lot of people who mirror that back to you by not having time for you, by not showing up for you, by lots of different ways. If you've had a lot of experience of infidelity, you're probably going to unconsciously choose the person on the app who's going to cheat on you. These are all very sticky and strange things that we repeat and happen. And oftentimes as a therapist, you're like, how did you go out into the world and find yourself in your most negative core belief about yourself again? But here you are, look at you, you've done it. I don't know how it happens, but it is like such an intimate and personal journey of kind of coming back into, hey, like that thing I want out there from them, I can offer myself. And it's beautiful, truly, when you do get to have the lived experience of someone offering you that thing that you didn't think you were worthy of. It does happen. You don't have to learn how to love yourself before someone else can love you. Other people teach us how to love ourselves and what care looks like. But sometimes it doesn't go that way, and you have to be the first person that shows up and really offers yourself things that you want and need and are desiring and deserve.
Mm-hmm. I think that's just a beautiful way of looking about it. And again, it relates really well into what you spoke about just previously about the slow dating. It's like being conscious again of your own needs and having a better understanding exactly of what you're wanting and needing. And in a way, it's about building that self-awareness around your ways of thinking, your habits. And like you said, too often people are mirroring everything onto us that we're either neglecting, distracting, or, self-destructing in a way of not giving ourselves enough love. And when it comes to relationships and being more in a secure relationship, because I know from doing all the work, the healing and the self-loving, we do end up standing tall, knowing exactly what we're wanting. But what are the key foundational elements of being in a secure, fulfilling relationship?
Again, such a unique answer. Security is very self-defined. Some people are going to want that security to be someone who brings them a sense of calm or is constantly steady or is always, available and present to them. Other people are going to want that person to be their exploratory, curious, adventure partner. And that's going to bring them a sense of security because that's their value. And so depending on what our life experience has and has not been, what we value more in someone else and in our lives is going to be different. Someone who hasn't experienced a lot of safety relationally is probably going to want the really safe, like, you're there, I'm there, we have respect and autonomy, we're not merged, we're not fused or codependent, but I know that you're always going to be there. Someone who's had maybe a lot of safety, they're like, a secure relationship for me is like knowing that I can go adventure and do XYZ and you're still going to be here, and also you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and you're not going to resent me when I go off and do this. And I do often find that we have like one definition of a secure relationship, like this is what it should look like, or like if they don't make my central nervous system calm, then it's not secure, or if they do XYZ, then like we have anxious avoidant tendencies going on. Where potentially, where I invite my clients is to like write their own definition of a secure relationship. Like, you get to choose this. It's ultimately yours. You're the only one who's going to be experiencing it. If you need a little anxious, avoiding cat and mouse dynamic to like maintain desire with, and it is relatively safe, and you know they're going to be there, but you need that every once a month, then great, that's your version of a secure relationship. It might not hit all of the boxes, but it fits all your needs and wants. That's amazing. Because oftentimes I feel people trying to fit themselves into that definition of a secure relationship, or trying to change their partner into that, when if they took a step back, it's not broke. And so they're trying to fix something that's not broken. It, for me as a therapist, I'm like, oh, interesting. Why are we doing that?
It's like diving a little bit deeper, of having the understanding of those patterns. What in relation to, you know, the secure relationship, and as you mentioned, it's so different to every person, but what are some red flags that should people be cautious of when they are starting a new relationship?
I only really see one giant red flag, and that's when you start lying to yourself.
Mm.
That's all. Because what they're doing is just what they're doing. And you can choose to see that and walk away, or you can choose that to double down and try and change them. You can choose to see that and accept it. I I don't know if what they're doing is what you think they're doing. I have no idea. And probably you don't either. And they might not even have consciousness or be conscious enough to know what their actions are. And who knows, maybe they're quite fragmented and split, and being deceptive is just a part of their identity, and they don't actually think it's a problem. No idea. But when you start lying to yourself about the treatment that you're experiencing or not experiencing, that's the red flag. That's when, like, why do I need to lie to myself to stay in connection to someone else?
That is such a
That's like
powerful
really,
way. Oh, it's such a powerful way to look at it. If someone doesn't understand or has that level of awareness that they are lying to themselves, what are some prime examples of someone betraying themselves in being in a type of relationship like that?
do you mean like examples of when you might start lying to yourself? Is
Yeah.
that yeah? I mean, even early on, like, I'll use some examples I've heard, like a client being like, we had like such a nice date, and then they told me they had to like go to a work function after, and it just didn't make sense because we had been drinking together. Or I ran into them with this other woman, and they like said it was a colleague. Or every time I call them, they say that they're with their family. I'm like, so you're starting to lie to yourself and go against, like, my intuition is saying something is off. I'm going to lie to myself and believe what they've told me. I'm going to lie to myself and go, yeah, this story makes sense, even though it doesn't make sense. And that's kind of those pieces. And there's lots of ways that shows up. But it is like, okay, the math doesn't equal here, or I'm picking up something is not making sense. And instead of honoring that it doesn't make sense, I'm just going to lie to myself and pretend that it's fine.
Mm. That's so powerful. I can see my old self in what you've just said as well. It's having this gut feeling of knowing something is wrong, yet again, I lie to myself, and then later down the track I noticed that I should have listened to it. How I know that like intuition is a big thing for majority of people. What are some fundamentals of having a stronger relationship with your intuition?
Oof. One thing that I didn't expect when I became a psychotherapist is how kind of spooky hearing people's stories would make you kind of view the world. And in my clinical experience, I've had clients come in and they're like, I'm confused. Is this my intuition, or is this my relationship anxiety? Like, I don't know the difference. When hearing, hundreds of those stories, I have yet to have one where there was absolutely nothing. The
Mm.
story my client might have made up around the other person's behavior and it feeling off might have been totally wrong, but there was still something there going on that the person was trying to hide. could have had totally different story that they've made up on their own history and their own facts, but there was something there. And so oftentimes people have this question of like, how do I tell the difference between my intuition and my anxiety? And where I go, they're kind of the same thing. Your intuition though is just that feeling. It's the physiological, like, this doesn't make sense. Your anxiety takes that feeling and then creates lots of stories off of it. But the fact that you're having that type of response, if something doesn't make sense, that's enough information for you to either start asking questions, to slow down and start noticing, to get curious, like to leave if that's what you want to do, to invest more, to figure it out, whatever. But they aren't such different experiences if you actually slow it down. Anxiety just creates a lot of narrative.
It's such a beautiful way to be able to understand that as well. And the way you broke it down from the intuition that leads into the anxiety, because again, too often people won't know the difference. And then they think as if there's something wrong with them, or they think, oh, they're crazy for thinking that way, or they'll be gaslighted by partners going, oh, you're crazy. What are you talking about? So that leads to a lot of insecurity in our own self-belief. And as you mentioned, we start lying to ourselves. When it comes down to those unmet needs in relationships or in any unresolved patterns around, I guess, like trauma, what are some common themes that you've seen that are related to people's unmet needs, and how can they effectively communicate those issues with their partners or people that they're dating?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question correctly. How do people communicate unmet needs in relationship? Or is that, yeah. I heard the piece about trauma and I was like,
yeah.
Make sure I'm answering properly. Unmet needs in relationship. Yeah, I'm stumbling because I'm like, for me, I'm just like, this feels quite, the first step with your unmet needs is actually knowing what your needs are. And then that communication piece is, have we created a safe enough bubble where I can share everything? Oftentimes I find people end up in relationships where they're like, if they are afraid that if I ask for my need to be met, that something is going to happen in a consequence, or there'll be a ripple. And then I ask them, do you really want to be in a relationship where you have to suppress what you need? We don't have a lot of cultural training or support to actually name our needs and to be really kind of like, this is the thing. But I do feel like, specifically with kind of pop psychology, Instagram psychology, that there is a larger momentum with that, for people to name their needs. That is at least present in my algorithm. There's a lot of encouragement of like, how do you do this? I don't know if I answered your question very well, but if there's anything I missed or you want to rephrase, let me know.
No, I understood it. What I would love to know a little bit more is how can they communicate their own unmet needs with their partners, as like referring back to how sometimes they will feel like crazy for thinking a certain way.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for you, because especially when you start to get into, my partner is making me feel crazy, my partner might be gaslighting me, my partner might be manipulating me or deceiving me, I always, and I think this is really evident in how I post and how I show up online, I remove my voice from abusive relationship dynamics. And I do this intentionally because there's so much noise about what an abusive relationship is, what it is not, how you act in it, how you get out, da 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 da. And as someone who's experienced highly abusive relationships and works with people in very toxic or abusive relationships, it's so personal. And so I don't know the ingredients that are in that dynamic. If you go to your partner who's gaslighting you and you say, these are my needs. And this person is someone who is maybe further on the narcissistic spectrum. They're going to go, okay, you've told me what your needs are. I'm going to give them to you for a week, and then I'm going to take them away to punish you the next time you do something I don't like. And so I don't have, like, when you name like the other half of that, I go, oof, I am not going to participate or provide my kind of expert or training because it's so sensitive. And I think that anyone who is in a toxic or abusive relationship, the best thing they can do to figure that out, or if there is gaslighting or they're being called crazy, is to like get off Instagram and go find a therapist.
Mm. It's so interesting how you mentioned, and first of all, I just want to thank you for your honesty as well by stating the facts around that and your expertise. And interestingly enough, how you mentioned to get off Instagram.
It's not helpful. You can find anything you want on there to validate staying, or to validate your opinion, or to validate their behavior, or to validate that you're crazy, or to validate that they're not gaslighting you.
Mm.
When what you actually need is a trained professional. You don't need an Instagram post. That's actually super unhelpful. And when I am working with people who are trying to heal from a toxic relationship or abusive relationship, that's often something I'm quite strong on, is please get off pop psychology.
Mm.
Please just be in this process with me. And I will recommend you resources and books that I know are really, really good.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely seeking professional help around that and not reading someone's post on Instagram that gets 1,000 likes and everyone's commenting on it.
Or even in those places, oftentimes this comes up with chemistry or compatibility as well. Or like, in a long-term relationship, I've lost desire. And they're like, oh yeah, that's normal, da, 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 da. But what I'm hearing is like, actually desire was never there. And you're actually experiencing a form of sexual violation or sexual assault in your relationship. But you're justifying that because you're going online and reading posts about how desire is never, desire in long-term relationship fades. It's like, actually, those are vastly different experiences. But in that realm of social media, or pop psychology, these things can get quite fused. And so when I write about relationships, and you named this before we started, I try and be quite direct, quite clear, and usually don't touch anything too sticky in the realm of toxicity or abuse, even though that's a lot of the work that I do.
Mm. Yeah, literally. And it reminds me of a post that you wrote not long ago about chemistry and compatibility, how chemistry is required to co-create a love story, and compatibility is required to co-create a life story. And that definitely sunk in when I was reading that post. And I recall you I recall you expressing in that post as well about your own story around that.
Yeah, I definitely, coming from my own history of trauma, but then also coming from relational experiences that were quite high in abusive dynamics. And, one of the hardest things about being in an abusive relationship is that becomes your norm of connection, that level of adrenaline and arousal and cortisol and the stress response, and your whole nervous system kind of changes to adapt to that level of anxiety. And so even as, abusive relationship dynamics exited my life, I would find myself still in like quite volatile connections that were premised around physical attraction. And for me, it was no surprise that I had found myself there. It was just the same level of energy and activation and arousal and stress response, but now differently focused. And it's taken a lot of work in my own personal life to kind of let that go and be like, that's a peak experience. It's one I can co-create with someone in a relationship. It doesn't have to be my whole relational experience. And actually, two people can't live in a peak experience together. It's not possible. And if they try and make it possible, it's going to go quite sideways and be quite sticky for both people.
Mm. I'm sure whoever's listening to this may resonate with everything that you're saying. Otherwise, it's just me resonating with this whole conversation. What are some significant changes that you have made yourself that have helped you to step away from that need of repeating that pattern?
Mhm. First, I want to acknowledge it's hard. It's like really, really hard if that's what you have known. One thing that's been really helpful is having someone who is secure, who's constantly chosen me, who's been present, who's there, who's like unwavering. Those experiences have been so helpful, but also in myself of just, going through specifically one relational experience. And then after that, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I don't like I actually energetically don't have the energy to invest in doing this with someone else again. I just don't. And I think most people have their version of that moment. If it's just genuine exhaustion, like mine was, it wasn't necessarily like this big moment of consciousness shifting. I wish that I had that story being a therapist, but I don't. I was just like, I'm tired. And like, this is the same Ferris wheel. And I've been doing this since I was like 16 years old. I want something different and I'm willing to try something different. And so when something different came along and it felt different, there was a curiosity to be like, okay, this isn't as exciting. It's not as adrenaline rushy. It's not all these things, but that's actually what I want because I just don't even have the energy to participate in something like that. And so that's oftentimes I say that to people that it doesn't have to be this big breakthrough moment. It can just be small moments of choosing to be in reality instead of fantasy, to be truthful with yourself instead of deceiving yourself about what a connection is or is not.
That whole deceiving piece, I swear, like comes back in cycles, and it's all connecting the dots together and being more self-aware about our own actions. And thank you so much for your honesty, because again, like breaking the cycle takes a while. And a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves when they do find themselves in a repeated cycle, and then they feel shame and the guilt around that. Is that something that you had experienced yourself?
Of course, yeah, specifically even being a therapist and being like, I should know all these things, or it should be easy, or like, this person is not good for my life in any way. Why do I miss them? Of course, I've had all of those feelings plus 10 more, and I get it. And it's not something that goes away quickly. And I don't know if it's something that goes away ever completely. For me, it's always a little voice inside my head that's like, oh, I could have fun on the Ferris wheel again. But then there's like another voice that's like, yeah, but that's tiring and you don't have time, you have things to do. And I'm like, okay, that's fair. And so, it is kind of having that type of grace with yourself that like, I could go do that again, but I don't want to.
Mm. Yeah, it's so true. And as you mentioned from the start, it's just taking those slower steps when you're back dating and being more conscious about the decisions that you're making.
Mhm.
Because again, like if the adrenaline comes up again, it's like a sign of a repeated pattern.
Mm-hmm. I often say this to my clients, but it's quite easy to be in relational chaos or relational disharmony. You can get on an app, you can date 5 people, you can be unfaithful, you can break up with someone in the middle of the night and go date someone else. It's quite easy to just be chaotic and sporadic. It's really hard to be consistent and choose relational harmony with other people or experience relational calm. Like that's really hard. And so I oftentimes remind people like it's easier to be the other way. It
Mm-hmm.
really is. We can always go back to it. It's not so easy to be in relationships where we've been fully honest, where we're aligned, where we feel connected, where we feel secure, where we show up, where we are consistent. That's hard.
That whole consistency piece, again, it doesn't just relate to relationships, but also the relationship within ourselves as well. It's like being consistent by taking care of ourselves first and making sure that we're regulated enough to change and break those old patterns.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the biggest ones I spend my time talking about, is just kind of assisting my clients to be like, okay, how do you get your life to a place where you have enough security and stability within yourself and with the environment around you and what you're doing for this pattern of like deep chaos over there to end? Because if we're running around doing 5,000 things, feel scattered and fragmented, we're not even going to notice the relational chaos because our life is just chaotic.
So many people are chaotic in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely myself at one time too.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that as well. And then again, the chaos just perpetuates more chaotic relationships, friendships, whatever that means.
Totally. Yeah. I oftentimes, when I look back on my own history, I'm just like, oh, that one, because things are, relatively calm. And then I'll be like, oh, that one chaotic choice I made. Look at it, just like dominoes across the board. Okay. I'm like, okay, like one choice in chaos can just like start the whole vortex again. And that's a part of being human. I know that that's just what's going to happen. But I do oftentimes invite people to be like, okay, like if this is really what I want, what are all the ways I'm not choosing that?
That is such a powerful question to ask yourself. So powerful. Wow. I would love to finish a conversation today with, we're on the topic of chaos. So I would love any tangible, I know this is going to be a little bit of a broader question, like all of my questions today, but some tangible ways to help someone navigate around this chaotic living and being.
Yeah, the first aid is just, I often find, is acknowledging with people, you live in a world that is like priming you to be that way. We're all hyperstimulated, overworked, pushed with 1,000 messages coming at us every day. That's chaotic. It's crazy making. It's hard. Full stop. It's not just you. The second piece is like, where am I participating in that in my life? Like, where am I getting on the chaos train and just going with it? Third question, like, where can I get off? Where can't I get off? Maybe my work environment is always going to be chaotic because that's the career I'm in. That's totally fine. That doesn't mean you're wrong or that the rest of your life is doomed and destined to be this way, but it's setting boundaries around that. And a harder question, what parts of you actually like the chaos? Because when we're in chaos, there's not a lot of capacity for us to be conscious. We just kind of get to feel things and do things and have experiences, and we're just kind of like going with it. It can feel good sometimes, it can feel bad sometimes, but we're relatively quite distracted, so nothing really impacts us. That might serve you. And if it does serve you, why do you want that to change? I often, in being a therapist, I do think that there is some truth to the statement of ignorance is bliss. Like it really can be, truly. And so being in chaos and being distracted and being overwhelmed and being overworked can definitely be a mechanism to self-protect from maybe things you don't want to feel. And only you can decide if it's worth it or not me.
Such a powerful way of looking at it and being able to navigate around that as well. I can relate to the messages, the constant notifications and the reminders, and you don't notice it till you are able to put boundaries in place around that. I remember the first time I started putting boundaries around like my Instagram and Facebook and minimizing as many notifications as possible. And you notice yourself not reaching to the phone as much as you used to because nothing's coming in. There's no chaos.
Yeah, I also too. I have two separate phones. I have kind of like my one phone that everyone who knows me and loves me, they get the messages there. And then I have my other phone that has my WhatsApp and like all of the random stuff. And it's like been the best decision of just like separating the two. There's a specific time to engage with the rest of the world, and the people that I know and love me back, they can access me whenever they want, but the rest of the world can't. And I've noticed how much that has changed. This is my ability to be present as well.
That is so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for jumping on a chat today. It has been such an eye-opening, and me personally, I can see what changes I need to start implementing myself just to better more of my perception of dating. I've noticed I've been very chaotic, so I'm going to be starting to take it a little bit slower. So thank you for that.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was so lovely.
Oh,
It's
it
nice
was
to chat.
so good. You too. Thank you. And girls, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please make sure that you screenshot it, tag us at the Women's Fitness Academy. Until next time, let's make those conscious efforts of noticing what the differences of feelings that are coming up for us.